thanks for staying tuned with us. This is our first conversation for this morning, and it's all about World Day Against Child Labor, which is celebrated internationally on June 12th, and we join those celebrations, or at least recognition here in Belize, and we're also extending that recognition as we continue to fight diligently against child labor. And joining us to have this conversation, very important conversation, we have the Labor Commissioner herself, Ms. Rissela Dominguez Patt, on set, as well as Senior Labor Officer at the Labor Department, Mr. Rudy Ake. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, good morning.
So if we could start, Labor Commissioner, with giving us a general overview of what the World Day Against Child Labor is and how Belize joins in recognizing this day.
Okay, in terms of World Day Against Child Labor, this is celebrated worldwide in an effort to reduce child labor. Worldwide, we have, in terms of numbers and statistics, we have approximately 138 million children affected in terms of child labor. And so we are a part of the International Labor Organization, and we also are a part of other international organizations which ensure, and our goal is to reduce or practically eliminate child labor. And so every year in June, the world comes together to commemorate that day. And we join along with the world, whereby we focus specifically on June 12th and also the entire month of June to build awareness in terms of child labor. What is child labor? How can we join this effort in eliminating child labor?
So according to the Statistical Institute of Belize, boys are 2 to 3 times more likely to be affected by child labor here in Belize. How are you guys using these statistics from the Statistical Institute of Belize to try to eliminate some of the very things you just spoke of?
So when we look at the statistics, we had seen that child labor is more, you can see prevalence in child labor in the agriculture sector, and that is where you see most men going to work. And so what we have been doing throughout the years is to partner with these associations, for example, the Sugarcane Association, the Citrus Associations, and we have signed MOUs with these associations whereby we would come into an agreement to say, you know what, we need to educate the parents. But also, child labor has been reducing throughout the years here in Belize, specifically in terms of the agriculture sector, because we have these fair trade agreements that we need to sign. And so one of the obligation of these companies is to ensure that there are no child labor. So even the association has an obligation to ensure that they educate or even support families to ensure that children stay in school, and to educate them, to let them know that children must go to school and not be engaged in hazardous work or work that it will affect them physically, socially, morally.
That is to say that there are trade obligations placed on certain operations and certain companies. So if you want to trade, let's say for sugar, for example, where free trade exists, if you want to trade sugar cane and then sugar on the regional international market, well, those companies overseas, they have a standard, and child labor must not be a part of your operations. But there's been this debate about how far can I push the boundaries.
The difference between chores and child labor.
Perhaps that's one way to put it. Or how, to what extent can I have a child work before it's considered child labor? So I want to take a step back, Mr. Ake, just for you to help us define or understand what exactly is child labor.
All right, when we're talking about child labor, we're talking about an activity that deprives a child from going to school, or something that is going to affect their health, their physical or mental health. And so any activity that goes beyond that, then that would be considered child labor. Currently, we're working on the legislation. We do have what we call a light work list and a hazardous list. So we're not saying that children cannot work. They cannot do chores at home, but there are certain things that they can do and certain things that they cannot do. And so we're amending our legislation to make sure that they align with those,
Okay.
so that we can see what is child labor and what is not.
So what is the light work list and heavy work list, and what does that speak to? Does that speak to categories that are child labor under light work and categories that are child labor under heavy work?
So what happened in 2018, we had a project called the Clear 2 project. And under that project, we had to identify strategies and recommendations to eliminate child labor. And one of the things that took place is that we formulated a legislative review committee. That legislative review committee looked at all the legislations that deal with child labor to ensure that we have all the legislations coincide with each other. Because as we speak right now, some legislations say have child, some others at age 14, others have it at age 16. So we need to ensure that all the legislation coincide with each other. And so they also looked at the Labor Act, the SHAPS Act. And so they made recommendations to changes to those legislations, and that is what we're looking at right now. So Cabinet approved last year in December the amendments to the child labor. The Labor Act, if you look at the Labor Act right now, it speaks very minimal in terms of child labor. It has very minimal protections, and even in terms of fines, it charges $25 anybody engaged in child labor. So that is very minimal. So with Cabinet's approval, which took place in December, now we have submitted this to the AG's ministry. They're reviewing it. One of the things, as what Mr. Ake mentioned, is that we're looking at that to incorporate a light work list and a hazardous work list.
Okay.
And so this list will indicate and guide employers to say, okay, at young persons, what can a young person do? What can they not do? Right? So that is where the light work comes in and the hazardous work list comes in as well.
I want to look at perhaps a more realistic example of where people might find that blurred line and not be able to determine if it's considered light work or hazardous or prohibiting children from going to school, for example. We know that in the agricultural sector, there's a high percentage of children falling victim to child labor. However, if you pass by in an urban area, you might see children selling with their vendor parents. Would that be considered child labor if they go to school but they have to come back and they have these very real responsibilities?
So if we look at the legislation, it does not spell it out, but that is one of the things that we're looking at in terms of the amendments, which was approved in December. The amendment will tell you how many hours a child can work. And what ages these children can engage in employment. For instance, any person below the age of 18 is considered a child. And so persons, as you know, with the amendment to the legislation in terms of the Education Act, the person can legally be going to school at age 16. It's mandatory to be at school at age 16. So with that amendment, we also need to amend our Labor Act. And so it spells out how many hours a child can work so that it does not affect their school.
How many hours?
With the new amendment, they can only be working 2 hours during a school work day.
Perhaps I'm getting into the trenches here, but what do you define as work?
So as I said, you will be guided by the light work list and the hazardous work. Going back to the selling, what we have noted, and the Labor Department works along with other ministries and other departments. And so we are working very closely with the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Committee and also with the National Committee for Families and Children. And so what we're looking at is persons who are selling on the street. Because we've noticed that there has been many parents who take advantage of these situations because they know that once the child is the person who is engaged, then persons will feel compassion and be obligated to purchase from these. And so we want to ensure and educate people and see how we can support them. Maybe they lack finances, we don't know. But what we're going to do is that we will be going on the streets to look at these types of situations and monitor why these things are happening, and to educate them, to tell them this cannot take place.
How do you police that, though, when you're speaking to perhaps a parent that says, Miss, this is the only way we could put food on the table. My child can't go to school if we don't have money. They're doing this on the weekend, or they're doing this after school.
And that is where we are partnering with the other departments, because it's not just the labor department that has a role to eliminate child labor, but it also Ministry of Education. It also has to do with the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Committee, with the National Committee for Families and Children. And so we are working together. We have formulated a group, and we're working together to see how we can address some of these issues, especially the ones that you mentioned, to say, you know what, we don't have any funds. My child can't go to school if I don't do this.
Yeah,
right?
These are commercial and industrial examples. Are there examples in the home that you all address as well? How closely does the Labor Department work with the home, where it might sound comical, a child might say, oh, this is child labor, you got me to work hard, but does the Labor Department cross that boundary or that barrier or that line from commercial and industrial into homes?
Well, like the Labor Commissioner said, we do have the light work list. And even though we might not go into the homes and say, okay, this is child labor, but we do labor education and child labor education to the public. When we go to schools, primary and secondary schools, and we let them know, okay, what is child labor and what is not. Like I said before, we're not telling them you cannot do anything. I mean, at home, no one says you can spread your bed, you can clean up your room, you can help your older siblings to wash up. It doesn't mean that that is child labor. But when it comes now to doing more hazardous work, no, then you would say, okay, that would probably be child labor. If, let's say, for example, you're telling your 10-year-old to go and chop the yard with a machete, no, that's something different. And so we have to look at it based on a case-by-case scenario. No? So, like I said, we're not saying that you cannot do the work, but there are some things that you can do, right?
Which is, it's interesting because I think cultural norms also shape how we view what is child labor and what is not child labor, because growing up, that was to a degree a part of my cultural norm. Get one machete and go chop, right?
Yes.
And I know they accuse my parents of putting me in a child labor position, but that was a part of the cultural norm. How much of that do we consider when we draft and put together legislation? Maybe the Mennonite community, they're big on agriculture and having their children learn this type of work ethic.
Yeah. So one of the things that I want to go back with in terms of, do we go into the homes?
Yeah, okay.
We don't go into the homes, but we work very closely, specifically when it comes to child labor, we work very closely with the human development. And if it is that these children have to be removed from those homes, the Ministry of Human Development would take those aspects and decide whether children need to be removed or not. So we work very closely with other departments. Now, when it comes to our norm or our cultural decisions that we did in the past, which has in some way, form, improved us, because we used to do that, right? So we have to look at it very clearly, and that is why when we create these legislations, we do consultations to ensure that we bring everybody together and we have all their feedback and incorporate those into the legislations.
I was able to take a look at the hazardous list, and I think it's really interesting because they have a list divided into different sectors. So we've been speaking about the agriculture sector. Of course, you mentioned anything that has to do with like manual work of clearing of land. It also speaks to handling of heavy machinery that in most cases, you know, requires a license. In other sectors, we also have fishing or subsector fishing, for example. Sorting, unloading, and transporting catches is also considered hazardous. So in this case, child labor. Diving for various aquatic species or to free snagged net, child labor. Actively fishing, pulling fish onto boat, child labor. Cleaning fish or shellfish, child labor. In other services applicable to all services of work, carrying heavy loads, use of fire, that speaks for itself. use of dangerous tools, use of chemicals, I think is also speaking for itself.
Consumption of alcohol.
Consumption of alcohol. Child labor.
Well, it endangers the child.
Yes.
Yeah.
Put the child in a really hazardous
Of course, we
position.
spoke about vending, street selling, vending on moving vehicles, in the tourism sector, exposure to illegal activities such as prostitution or employment in adult entertainment, including but not limited to bars, strip
Yeah,
clubs,
it's pretty
casinos,
straightforward.
brothels. Are we seeing cases of that very prevalent in Belize?
The worst forms of child labor, you might not see them directly, but it may see it. If you dig deeper, you might encounter those. But we're not seeing those yet in Belize.
This is
I see a
very-
list here. I see what made the list here was babysitting. Could you expand on that? Because I feel like there are a lot of children who are babysitting their siblings.
And that speaks to the home, right?
And that speaks to
directly.
the home.
So babysitting has to do with, the parents going out, I don't know, going to do whatever, and leaving younger siblings to take care of the babies, maybe a 5-year-old taking care of a 1-year-old.
Okay.
So that exposes them to different hazards.
I see here for the transportation, conductors, children acting as conductors. That's also child labor. Shop work, selling items that can only be used by adults. Carrying heavy loads. Use of ladders. Auto repair, anything mechanical, body works.
This is a
Sewing.
very comprehensive
It's
list.
very comprehensive. And then I want to get to light work. So in the agriculture sector, this is what they can do. So harvesting of crops, including grain, vegetables, and fruits, they can do that. Manual de-seeding or sorting of fruits, they can do that. Preparing a garden or greenhouse without the use of pesticides or chemicals. Basket work, caring for small and barnyard animals, other services. They can provide vending in a market, vending in a stand, selling products in shops, except for products only meant for adult consumption.
Makes
So there's
sense.
that specific line there. There's something for the banana industry. They can take out banana from tanks, filling of trays in domestic
This
work.
is household, right?
Household. They can hang and fold clothes, wash dishes, sweep, garbage collection, rake the yard, manual weeding, wash cars, gardening without dangerous tools, make beds. So for the common person tuning in right now, they might think, so are you saying that anything outside of this domestically would be considered child labor?
So if you notice, any list cannot list everything because then it would be a really extensive
long
list,
list, yeah.
right? But if you look at domestic work and you look at what is listed under domestic work, anything familiar to that can be done.
Okay. So as long as they're not exposed to chemicals, to any type of machinery or utensils that can harm them,
Yes.
then you're
They can
in the
do that.
safe area.
Right.
So, just to be clear, when we say child, what age are we looking at? Just so going forward, our viewers understand clearly. When you say the child in the child labor, what's the age?
Anyone below the age of 18
Anyone
would be
below the
considered a
age.
child.
Okay.
Right. But in terms of the hazardous work list, young persons can do hazardous work. However, they need to seek permission from the Labor Department because we need to look at what work will be done and where they will be working, will be exposed to certain things. So we need to look at the work and then we need to give approval.
That's like
Aside from,
yeah, that's like if, for example, I'm 16 and I'm seeking an internship, let's say at a printing company that has heavy machinery, right? And they have like these equipment that you cut a lot of stuff, sharp equipment, you cut papers, you cut books and stuff like that. Just one example. As a 16-year-old, I may get an opportunity to intern there I'm not sure if that is legal, but anyways, and so I would need to go to the Labor Department and I would need to seek approval from the Labor Department before I confirm that I'll take on the job.
That's correct.
Yeah.
some viewers tuning in right now are disagreeing with some of the things that were mentioned on the hazardous list. I saw one viewer saying, Chaman, not the character development. Others are saying that it promotes weak kids. For persons who might want a better understanding of the impacts of child labor, aside from what we know can happen physically if they're exposed to certain things, are there any other negative effects of child labor, perhaps mentally, emotionally, that a child may experience?
And that is what basically child labor is. Anything that destroys their physical, mentally, emotionally. You know, it affects them in all these morally, in all these ways. And so what we want to do is not to disenfranchise someone from learning, but to ensure that there is not child labor, you know, employers taking advantage, exposing children out there to these situations of hazardous work. Or even as a parent, you might not understand what dangers these young children encounter on the streets if they're alone. There are several things that can happen to young girls.
Yeah.
We know in the past young girls have been disappearing. And is it because these young girls were out there on their own? So it causes an exposure to them, and it could cause them harm and even maybe death, going to the extreme of death. They disappear.
Yeah.
You know, and these are some of the things that we need to encourage in terms of the development of a child, that they are physically well, morally well, and so when they grow up as an adult, they can be able to contribute to the economic of the country.
If we feel that there's a family or a child around us or we've witnessed that is experiencing child labor, what should we do?
You should contact the Labor Department. We have offices countrywide. And so whenever we have cases of child labor, especially when it deals with family situations, we work very closely with human development, because human development will have to be involved to go into the homes to assess the situation and even remove the children if necessary.
Where are we today with updating legislation and making it more relevant to today's context? I know you spoke about Cabinet passing certain amendments. Where are we today?
We are doing the comprehensive review of the Labor Act.
Okay.
So in March, we signed, we got a consultant to go through the first phase of the comprehensive review. We have had interviews with different stakeholders, focus group discussions. We have had stakeholder consultation. And so in September, they're supposed to submit to us the situational and legal gap analysis and recommendations. And then we move on to phase 2 of the comprehensive review of the Labor Act, which will look at the more extensive and more deeper dive in terms of the recommendations being made. Right? And so that is where we are in terms of the comprehensive review of the Labor Act. We want to make sure that this legislation covers international labor standards, and also to look at the realities of work, digital platform. We know that COVID made us go more into digital, so we are finding more forms of employment. So those are some of the things that the comprehensive review will also look at.
Yeah.
So, okay, finally, what do you do when a company perhaps comes to you and says, I want to ensure that my internal policies are in line with certain labor requirements, including, and more specifically, child labor requirements? How do you go about engaging a business, a company, an entrepreneur?
Well, normally every contract or policy must come to the Labor Department, and we make sure that we review them, and we make sure that they align with all of the legislations. Once they probably they do not meet, then we would recommend, you need to fix this section, you need to put in this section, you need to make sure it aligns. And then they go and they change it, and then we attest it and we sign off on it.
Okay.
And when that has been done, then that means that they have complied with the labor laws.
And that's a requirement usually across the board,
Yes,
right?
across the board. Everyone who has employment, has a policy or a contract, they must come to the Labor Department.
Interesting.
Alrighty, well, we have completely run out of time, but this is quite an interesting conversation. I know that a lot of people tuning in right now have been sharing their thoughts, trying to understand what constitutes as child labor, and of course, how we can acknowledge that and do our part in reporting it should we come in contact with a case as such.